My name is Colleen Moss, and I'm going to tell you a story today about grief and about how painting helped me work through that grief. I'm sharing the story with you today because I'm hoping to bring grief out into the open, to talk about something that almost no one wants to talk about, to give grief a voice in a way. In doing this, I'm hoping that will help others who are maybe going through this same experience. And I'm also hoping that it may encourage those of you who are going through an experience like this to use the creative process to help you through this. 4 years ago, on September 11th, 2008, my world was completely shattered. On that day, my beloved husband, Tom Wallen, died of stomach cancer. He had only been diagnosed 5.5 weeks before that. For many months after my husband died, I felt as though the pain and grief and despair that I felt would never lift. I was pretty sure I wouldn't survive, and in fact, I, in many ways, didn't want to survive. My husband was my entire life. He was everything to me, and it was my greatest fear that he would leave before me. I had felt in many ways like I had fallen through an abyss. With my husband's death, I had been thrown into the ranks of millions who had walked this terrible road before me. Grief is one of the most universal of all human experiences. To love someone, to be a wife, a husband, a parent, a child, a friend, a brother, a sister, means that you will most likely have your own experience with grief one day. Yet despite the fact that it is something that almost everybody experiences at least once in their lifetime, grief is something that has been driven into the shadows in our culture. And because of that, it is something that has to be suffered in solitude and isolation for those going through it. Because of this, I felt desperately alone in my grief and needed to find a voice for it. Several people suggested that I try journaling, but for me, words seemed completely insufficient. My grief seemed to be beyond words. I'm a painter, and prior to my husband's death, I painted landscapes. After my husband died, I couldn't bring myself to paint anything at all, much less a landscape. In fact, I found myself completely overcome with inertia, unable to do hardly anything at all except things that I needed to do for my basic survival. Finally, after a period of almost 8 months, I picked up a paintbrush. When I approached the canvas, I wasn't sure what I was going to paint. I just sat down to paint. And what came out was a picture of a heart. I later called it a wounded heart. Once I started painting the wounded hearts, I couldn't stop. Over a period of the next 3 years, I painted 12 canvases of wounded hearts. After each painting, I felt as though a little piece of pain had been released from my heart and placed onto the canvas. These paintings served as a catharsis, they served as a communication, as a voice for my grief, and ultimately they helped me survive. Looking back now on these 12 paintings, I can see that they clearly depict my personal journey through grief. They served as a documentation of my fight for survival and a documentation of the transformation of grief and the healing process. It's now been 4 years since my husband died, but my journey through grief is far from over. As time passes, grief changes form, but it remains nonetheless. And although I'm no longer painting hearts, I'm still painting my grief, and I still find the process therapeutic. It still helps me express feelings that can't be expressed in any other way. It also provides feedback to me about emotions that I may not realize I'm experiencing. I find and have found since painting all of my wounded hearts and the canvases that I paint now, I find that the paintbrush sometimes knows what the mind does not. And therefore it helps me understand feelings and issues that I may not have realized that I was experiencing or struggling with until I see them expressed on the canvas. I've shared this story with you in the hopes that I might help one of my fellow travelers in this journey through grief, and to help you know that you're not alone and that there is hope, and that expressing yourself through the creative process, whether it be painting or drawing or photography or writing, is one way to help you get through this terrible journey. Thank you.